The kick landed hard. A grown man's boot driving into the spine of a 6-year-old girl. A sick, trembling, fever-burning little girl who had done nothing but fall asleep on an airplane. The child's scream tore through the cabin like a knife. Her mother lunged forward, shaking, screaming, begging for help. And every single flight attendant on that plane turned their backs and walked away. Not one person in uniform moved to protect that child. But before the plane touched the ground, the woman who owned that entire airline picked up a phone. And by the time that plane touched the ground, nothing would ever be the same again. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. The morning started the way most mornings do for travelers passing through Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Loud, crowded, the kind of place where everyone is rushing somewhere, and nobody is really paying attention to anyone else. Gate C-22 was packed. Families with strollers, businessmen in wrinkled suits, college students with headphones, elderly couples moving slowly through the crowd. And right there in the middle of all of it, sitting quietly on a row of plastic chairs near the window, was a young woman named Rachel Bennett. Rachel was 34 years old. She was wearing a gray sweater, her natural hair pulled back into a loose bun, and she had one hand resting on the shoulder of her daughter Lily. Lily was 6. She had her mother's eyes, wide and expressive, and she was wearing a purple backpack shaped like a turtle. The turtle's name, according to Lily, was Franklin. She had told 3 different strangers about Franklin already that morning, and each time she said his name, her voice had this particular brightness to it. The kind of brightness that makes adults smile without meaning to. But that morning, Franklin wasn't getting much attention. Lily wasn't smiling. She was leaning into her mother's side, her forehead slightly warm, her small face pale in a way that had been worrying Rachel since the night before. Rachel had almost canceled the trip. She had turned it over in her mind a dozen times while packing their bags in the dark early that morning. Lily had a low fever. Not dangerous, not alarming, but real. The pediatrician had said it was probably a virus running its course. Told Rachel to keep her hydrated and watch for anything that changed. Rachel had brought Tylenol, juice boxes, Lily's favorite blanket that smelled like home, and every ounce of patience she had in her body. They were going to visit Rachel's mother in Indianapolis. Her mother, Evelyn, was 71 and had just had a hip replacement a short while earlier. She was recovering well, but she was alone. And Rachel had promised she would come. That promise was the only reason Rachel hadn't turned around and gone home. "Mama, my tummy feels funny," Lily said quietly. "I know, baby." Rachel pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, still warm. "You're going to be okay. We're going to see Grandma Evelyn, and she's going to make you her biscuits, and you're going to feel so much better." Lily considered this for a moment. "Does Grandma Evelyn's biscuits fix fevers?" Rachel laughed softly. "Grandma Evelyn's biscuits fix everything." That small exchange was the last truly peaceful moment Rachel would have for the next several hours. The boarding announcement came over the intercom, and Rachel gathered their bags, lifted Lily into her arms even though Lily was technically too big to be carried, and joined the line. Lily rested her chin on her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Rachel could feel the warmth radiating off her daughter's skin. She tightened her grip and kept moving. The flight was operated by Horizon Airlines, a mid-size regional carrier with routes up and down the Midwest. The plane was an Airbus A220, smaller than the wide-body jets people usually picture when they imagine airline travel, with 2 seats on one side of the aisle and 3 on the other. Rachel and Lily were seated in row 14, seats A and B, the window and middle seats on the left side of the aircraft. Rachel got Lily settled first, tucking the blanket around her, giving her a juice box, placing Franklin, the turtle backpack, under the seat in front of them. Lily pressed her face against the window and watched the baggage carts move across the tarmac below. "Mama, look at that little car!" "I see it. It's going so fast." "It is." Rachel was reaching into her bag for the Tylenol when the man sat down in the seat directly behind them. She didn't look at him right away. She had no reason to. She was focused on Lily, measuring out the correct dose, coaxing Lily to drink it with a sip of juice. She heard him settle in, heard the thud of what was probably a laptop bag being shoved under the seat, heard him exhale with the heavy, self-important sound of a man who considered every inconvenience in life a personal offense. His name, she would later learn, was Ronald Brooks. He was 57 years old, a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical supply company based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. He had the build of a man who had once been athletic and hadn't adjusted his self-image to account for the 2 decades since. He wore a blue button-down shirt with the top button open, khaki pants, and the expression of someone who had decided before boarding the plane that today was going to be a problem. He looked at the seats in front of him. He saw a small black child and her mother. He said nothing. He took out his phone and began scrolling. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this same choreography countless times. The lead flight attendant on this particular crew was a woman named Karen Ellis, with a face that was professionally pleasant and eyes that missed very little. Behind her were 3 other attendants. A young man named Tyler, who had been with the airline for a couple of years, a woman named Michelle, who was running on coffee and determination, and a senior attendant named Barbara, who had seen enough in her career to believe she had seen everything. None of them were prepared for what was about to happen. The plane climbed through a low layer of cloud and leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. The cabin shifted into that settled rhythm of a flight in progress. The hum of engines, the muffled conversations, the clinking of ice in plastic cups. The drink cart began its journey down the aisle. Lily had fallen into a light, restless sleep. Rachel watched her daughter's face, touched the back of her hand to Lily's cheek. Still warm. The child shifted in her seat, turned slightly, and in turning, the back of her small sneaker made contact with the seat in front of her. Not a kick, not intentional. The passive, uncontrolled movement of a sick child sleeping in a confined space. Behind them, Ronald Brooks looked up from his phone. "Hey," he said. His voice was low but pointed, the kind of low that is designed to carry just enough. Rachel turned. "I'm sorry. Your kid is kicking my seat." Rachel looked at Lily, who was barely moving. "She's asleep. She's sick. I'll try to—" "I didn't ask for your explanation," Ronald said. "Control your kid." Rachel felt the words land. She took a breath. "Sir, she is a 6-year-old child who is unwell. I apologize if she disturbed you. I will do my best." Ronald made a sound in the back of his throat, somewhere between a grunt and a dismissal, and looked back at his phone. Rachel turned forward. Her hands were tight in her lap. She reached over and gently repositioned Lily's legs, pulling the child slightly toward her. Lily stirred but didn't wake. Rachel kept her hand on her daughter's knee. Then Lily shifted again. She made the small, involuntary movements that children make when they are sick and uncomfortable and trying to find a position that doesn't feel quite so bad. Her knee rose and fell. Her foot moved, and for a fraction of a second, the heel of her sneaker tapped lightly against the back of Ronald's seat. What happened next happened so fast that the woman in row 13, seat C, a retired schoolteacher named Nancy Reed, would later tell investigators that she wasn't sure at first that she had actually seen what she thought she had seen. Ronald Brooks reached forward, over the back of his seat, and with the flat of his hand, he slapped Lily's legs. The sound was sharp and sudden in the cabin air. Lily woke up screaming. Rachel was on her feet before she even processed what had happened, her body moving on pure instinct, spinning around to face the seat behind her voice rising into the cabin in a way that made heads turn 3 rows in every direction. "What did you just do? Did you just hit my child?" Ronald looked up at her with an expression of complete and total calm. "She kept kicking my seat. She is 6 years old. She's asleep. She's sick. Then you should have kept her home." Lily was crying now, the deep, hitching sobs of a child who had been startled out of sick sleep by sudden pain and confusion. Rachel spun back to her daughter, pulling Lily into her arms, trying to check her legs, trying to comfort her, while simultaneously trying to manage the rage that was climbing up through her chest into her throat. "Someone help me," Rachel said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "Someone please, he hit my child." Nancy Reed in row 13 was already half out of her seat. "I saw it," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I saw what he did." A man across the aisle, 40s, large, in a gray polo shirt, turned fully around in his seat to look at Ronald. "That was out of line, buddy." Ronald shrugged. "She was kicking my seat. She was asleep," Nancy said. "Then she was kicking it in her sleep. She's a child. I paid for this seat same as everyone else." The exchange was getting louder. Heads throughout the cabin were turning. Conversations were stopping. A woman in row 11 pressed the call button above her seat. The small orange light began blinking over her row. Karen Ellis was at the back of the plane assisting a passenger with an overhead bin when Tyler touched her arm and pointed toward the middle of the cabin. She could see Rachel standing in the aisle holding Lily, could hear the child crying, could see the cluster of turned heads and tight faces. She started moving up the aisle immediately. "What's going on here?" she said, keeping her voice controlled, professional. Rachel turned to her and in one breath explained what had happened. Her voice was shaking. Lily had her face buried in her mother's neck, and both of her small hands gripping her mother's sweater. Karen looked at Ronald. "Sir, is this accurate?" Ronald met her eyes without flinching. "The child was kicking my seat repeatedly. I told the mother multiple times. She did nothing. I handled it." "You hit a child," Rachel said. "I tapped her legs. You slapped her." "It was a tap." Karen held up one hand. "Okay, let's bring it down." She turned to Rachel. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset. Can you please take your seat? I need to speak with both of you separately." Rachel looked at her. Something in Karen's expression, the practiced neutrality of it, the careful management of it, sent a cold feeling through Rachel's stomach. She sat down. She kept Lily in her lap, arms wrapped around her daughter, her chin resting on top of Lily's head. Karen leaned toward Ronald. Whatever she said to him, she said quietly. Rachel couldn't hear all of it. She caught fragments: airline policy, disturbance, remaining calm. She watched Karen straighten up, give Ronald a small, tight nod, and then begin walking back toward her station. Rachel stared at her. "That's it?" she said. Karen paused. "Ma'am, he hit my child and you're walking away?" "We are going to file an incident report upon landing, ma'am. At this time, the priority is ensuring the safety of all passengers." The safety of all passengers. Rachel's voice was very quiet now, which was somehow more unsettling than if she had been shouting. "My 6-year-old daughter is sitting here crying. She has a fever. She was sleeping. A grown man hit her, and you are telling me you'll file a report when we land?" Karen did not look away, but her jaw tightened slightly. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. I will do everything within my authority." "What does that mean? What does that actually mean?" Karen said nothing. Nancy Reed spoke up from row 13. "I would like to file a complaint. I am a witness. I saw exactly what that man did, and I want my name on record." "Absolutely, ma'am," Karen said, pivoting toward Nancy with practiced smoothness. "We will take all witness accounts." Rachel felt Lily shift against her. The child's temperature had not gone down. If anything, with the crying and the shock, she seemed worse. Rachel pressed the back of her hand to Lily's forehead. Warmer. Definitely warmer. "I need a cold cloth," Rachel said. "My daughter has a fever. Can someone bring Lily a cold cloth?" "I'll get you some ice from the galley," Tyler said, appearing at Karen's shoulder. He was younger than the others, and there was something in his face that Karen's face did not have. Something that looked like actual discomfort at what was happening. "Thank you," Rachel said. Tyler disappeared toward the front of the plane. Ronald behind them said nothing. Rachel could hear him breathing, could sense the total absence of remorse radiating off him in waves. She put her hand over Lily's ear as if she could shield her daughter from the sound of him. Across the aisle, the man in the gray polo shirt whose name was James Whitaker, a retired Army colonel, had been watching everything very carefully. He had been watching Karen walk away. He had been watching Ronald sit back with that smirk. He had been watching the other attendants avoid eye contact. And he had been watching Rachel, this young woman holding her sick daughter in an airplane seat, fighting to keep herself together in a situation that no parent should ever have to face. James Whitaker reached into his inside jacket pocket and took out his phone. He had a number in his contacts that most people didn't have. He had met Elizabeth Grant, the CEO of Horizon Airlines, twice. Once at a veterans advocacy gala in Washington and once at a corporate dinner in Chicago, where he had been a guest speaker. They had exchanged cards. They had kept loose professional contact over the years. He had never once used the number for anything personal. He used it now. He pulled up her contact, looked at it for a moment, and pressed call. "James Whitaker." The voice on the other end was alert, professional, slightly surprised. Elizabeth Grant was in her office on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Chicago, going over projections with two members of her board. "I apologize for interrupting whatever you're doing," James said, quietly, keeping his voice low so the people around him couldn't hear. "I'm currently on Horizon Airlines flight out of Chicago to Indianapolis, and there is a situation happening on this plane that I believe you need to know about." There was a brief silence on Elizabeth's end. Then, "Tell me," James told her. Methodically, precisely. The way a man who has given military briefings tells things. No emotion in his voice, just facts. A passenger, a sick child, a slap and a kick, a mother asking for help, flight attendants filing incident reports for later. When he finished, there was another silence. "How is the child right now?" Elizabeth asked. "Sick, crying. The mother is holding her." Elizabeth Grant said two words. "Hold on." The line went quiet for a moment. Then James heard her voice again, but she wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to someone else in the room. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a woman in a meeting. It was the voice of a person who had made a decision. James waited. Around him, the plane continued its flight. The engines hummed. A child 2 rows ahead of him was asking his father if they were almost there. Lily had stopped crying and was lying limp and tired against her mother's shoulder. Ronald Brooks was watching a video on his phone with one earbud in. "James," Elizabeth's voice came back on the line. Is the lead flight attendant a woman named Karen Ellis? James looked toward the front of the plane. I believe so. Yes. I need you to do one thing for me. I need you to make sure the people around you and that mother know that help is coming. Can you do that? Yes, James said. I can do that? Good. Another pause. Then, I'm gonna take care of this. The line went dead. James put his phone back in his pocket. He looked across the aisle at Rachel. She was stroking Lily's hair, her eyes straight ahead, her face the face of a woman who was holding herself together by force of will alone. Excuse me, James said. Rachel looked at him. My name is James Whitaker. I want you to know that someone in a position to help has been made aware of what is happening on this plane. You are not being ignored. Help is coming. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were red. Her jaw was set. She nodded once, slowly, and turned back to her daughter. 2 rows behind them, Ronald Brooks took out his other earbud and looked at the back of James Whitaker's head with narrowed eyes. He had caught part of that. Not enough to understand what had just happened, but enough to feel, for the first time since the incident, a small and unfamiliar sensation. Something that might, if he had been more honest with himself, have been recognized as unease. He put his earbud back in. He settled back into his seat, propped his elbow against the armrest, and went back to his video, entirely unaware that in her office a woman named Elizabeth Grant was reaching for a second phone on her desk, the phone that connected directly to the aircraft's communication system. In seat 14B, Lily Bennett coughed twice and pressed her face harder into her mother's neck. Rachel felt her daughter's heart beating fast and small against her own chest. It's okay, Rachel whispered. Mama's here. It's going to be okay. And somewhere above the clouds between Chicago and Indianapolis, 3 flight attendants continued their duties. A man in a blue button-down shirt watched a video with his earbud in. A retired colonel sat very still with his hands folded on his lap. And a 6-year-old girl with a fever and a turtle-shaped backpack tried to understand why the world had suddenly become so much louder and scarier than it had been earlier. And above all of them, invisible and certain as the altitude itself, a decision was being made. 43,000 feet below that plane, in a glass office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Elizabeth Grant had already stood up from her chair. She had already set down her quarterly projections. She had already looked at her 2 board members and said the 3 words that told them everything they needed to know about what kind of morning this was about to become. Those words were, "Give us privacy." The moment Elizabeth Grant's board members left the room, she was already moving. She crossed to the credenza behind her desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thin black binder that her assistant had prepared for exactly these kinds of moments. Flight manifests, crew rosters, direct comm protocols. Every piece of operational infrastructure she might ever need to reach a plane in the air. She had never actually used this binder before. She had hoped she never would. She found the number for the operations center on the second page and dialed it before she had even sat back down. Operations, this is Hayes. This is Elizabeth Grant. I need a direct line to the flight out of Chicago to Indianapolis. I need it right away. A beat of silence. Ms. Grant, I can patch you through to the cockpit communication system, but for cabin, then patch me to the cockpit and tell the captain, whoever is flying that plane, that I need the cabin PA system active. Now. Not in 5 minutes. Now. Yes, ma'am. Please hold. She did not sit while she held. She stood at her desk with one hand flat on the surface and stared at the Chicago skyline without seeing any of it. She was running the timeline in her head. James Whitaker had called a short while after the initial incident. The flight from Chicago to Indianapolis was short, which meant there was still time left in the air. Time during which a sick little girl was sitting in a seat with her terrified mother, while the man who had physically assaulted her sat 3 feet away, and the crew tasked with ensuring passenger safety was, by all accounts, doing absolutely nothing except waiting for the plane to land so they could hand a clipboard to somebody else. The hold music cut off. A new voice came on the line. Male, controlled, slightly tense in the way pilots get tense when they receive an unexpected call from corporate. Ms. Grant, this is Captain Warren. Is there an emergency I should be aware of? Captain Warren, I need 30 seconds on your PA system. There is a situation in your cabin involving a child who was physically assaulted by a passenger, and based on what I've been told, your crew has failed to adequately respond. I am going to address it directly. Another silence. Longer this time. Ms. Grant, with respect, I was not informed of any incident requiring... That's exactly the problem, Captain. You weren't informed because the people who should have informed you didn't. I'll explain everything fully when this plane is on the ground. Right now, I need 30 seconds on that PA. I'm asking you once. Captain Warren's voice came back shortly later. Go ahead, Ms. Grant. Elizabeth Grant took one breath. She pressed the phone to her ear and she started talking. In row 14, Rachel Bennett heard the chime of the PA system and looked up automatically the way everyone on the plane did, expecting a routine announcement about the weather in Indianapolis or the descent sequence. What came through the speakers instead stopped every conversation in the cabin mid-sentence. Attention all passengers on this flight. This is Elizabeth Grant, CEO of Horizon Airlines. I am speaking to you directly because I have been made personally aware of an incident that occurred in this cabin. A child was physically struck by a fellow passenger. This is not a matter that will be addressed upon landing. It is being addressed right now. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Around her, the entire cabin went absolutely still. Not the normal quiet of people not talking. The deeper quiet of people who have stopped breathing. To the mother of this child involved, I want you to hear this directly from me. What happened to your daughter is wrong. It is unacceptable. It will not be minimized or dismissed. I am personally ensuring that every measure available to this airline is being taken on your behalf as I speak. Lily lifted her head off her mother's shoulder. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. She looked at her mother's face and saw something she hadn't seen since they had boarded the plane. She saw her mother cry. Not the tight, controlled tears Rachel had been fighting back. Real tears. The kind that come when something you stopped expecting suddenly arrives. To the passenger responsible for this assault, you are known. Your name, your seat number, and a full account of your actions have already been documented. When this aircraft lands, law enforcement will be present at the gate. I would strongly advise you to stay in your seat. 3 rows back, Ronald Brooks pulled out both earbuds. His face, up to this moment, had maintained its baseline expression of barely concealed contempt for everything around him. That expression, over the course of the next few seconds, went through several distinct changes. Disbelief first, then a rapid recalibration, then something that was not quite fear, but was moving rapidly in that direction. He looked at the seat in front of him. He looked at the people around him. The man in the gray polo shirt across the aisle was looking directly at him. The woman in row 13 was looking directly at him. A middle-aged couple 2 rows up had turned completely around in their seats to look directly at him. Ronald looked straight ahead and said nothing. Elizabeth Grant's voice continued, and to every member of the crew on this flight, this conversation is not over. I expect every one of you to ensure the safety and comfort of that child and her mother for the remainder of this flight. Nothing else takes priority. I will be personally reviewing every action and inaction that took place in that cabin today. That is all. The PA clicked off. For a few full seconds, the cabin was the quietest place in the sky. And then, all at once, it was the loudest. Karen Ellis was standing at the galley at the back of the plane when the PA announcement ended. She had her hand on the counter and her knuckles were white. Tyler was standing nearby with the expression of someone watching a building come down in slow motion. Michelle had frozen mid-pour over a drink she had been preparing. Barbara, the most senior of them, was in the forward galley and could not be seen, but her voice carried back through the cabin on the first wave of noise from the passengers. "Oh, Lord," Barbara said. Karen straightened up. She rolled her shoulders back. Her face had gone through its own rapid sequence of changes during the announcement, and had now settled into a mask of professional composure that did not entirely hide the fact that her hands were shaking. "Tyler," she said, "go check on the child." Tyler was already moving. He was down the aisle quickly, crouching in the space beside Rachel's row. His voice low and direct. "Ms. Bennett," he said, reading her name from the manifest he had memorized during boarding. "I am so sorry. Can you tell me how Lily is doing right now?" Rachel looked at him. She was still holding Lily against her, one hand pressed to the child's forehead. "She needs a cold compress and she needs to not have a grown man sitting 3 feet behind her." "We can move you," Tyler said immediately. "We have 3 open seats at the front of the cabin, first-class section. I can have you moved right away." Rachel's eyes went to the seat behind her. Ronald Brooks was staring straight ahead. His jaw was working slightly, the way jaws work when a person is deciding what to say or whether to say anything at all. "Yes," Rachel said. "Move us." Tyler was back on his feet in one motion. He reached up and pulled their bags from the overhead bin before Rachel had even gotten Lily settled enough to stand. Nancy Reed in row 13 reached out and touched Rachel's arm gently as she passed. "You did nothing wrong," Nancy said. "Not one single thing." Rachel looked at her. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was barely a sound. They moved to the front of the cabin, 2 seats side by side. More space. Away from Ronald Brooks and his suffocating radius of contempt. Tyler brought a cup of ice wrapped in a thin napkin for Lily's forehead. He brought apple juice. He knelt down to Lily's level and said, in a voice that was entirely and genuinely kind, "Hey, I heard you have a turtle named Franklin." Lily looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "How do you know about Franklin?" "I know all the important things," Tyler said. Lily almost smiled. Almost. Rachel watched this exchange and felt something complex move through her. Something that was gratitude and grief at the same time. Because it should not have taken a CEO speaking on a loudspeaker for someone to be kind to her sick child. Back in row 14, Ronald Brooks had not moved. He had not spoken. He had put his phone away and was now sitting with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the headrest in front of him. Around him, the other passengers had shifted in their seats, turning slightly away from him with the particular body language of people who want to establish distance from something they find repellent. The man in the gray polo shirt, James Whitaker's neighbor, leaned across the aisle toward the woman sitting beside him and said quietly, "I've been on 1,000 flights. I have never seen anything like that." "He kicked her," the woman said. "She's 6 years old." He kicked her in the back. 2 rows behind Ronald, a passenger who had been silent throughout the entire incident. A young woman in her late 20s with a laptop open on her tray table had already taken a screenshot of Ronald's face from 3 rows away. She had already opened Twitter. She was already composing a thread. She had already typed the first 4 words, which were, "I need to document." She paused, then deleted it, then retyped it, then paused again. then posted it. Within a short while, before the plane had even begun its descent, that thread would have hundreds of retweets. Within an hour, it would have thousands. But none of that had happened yet, and the plane was still in the air, and the reckoning had not yet fully arrived. It was arriving, though. It was arriving at cruising speed. James Whitaker sat quietly with his phone face down on his knee. He had done what he came to do. He watched Tyler move up and down the aisle checking on Rachel and Lily. He watched Karen Ellis make her way toward the front of the plane, her face set and unreadable. He watched Ronald Brooks, the back of his head, the rigid set of his shoulders, and he recognized something in that posture that he had seen before, in men who have done something they cannot undo and are now in the process of deciding how to frame it to themselves. James had seen that posture in war zones. He had seen it in boardrooms. He had seen it in courtrooms, in parking lots, and hospital waiting rooms. It was the posture of a man who had not yet decided whether he was a victim or a perpetrator. The deciding, James knew from long experience, never ended in a way that was good for anyone. In the forward galley, Karen Ellis was on the phone with the ground crew at Indianapolis International Airport. She was speaking in the clipped, precise cadence of someone who is managing a crisis and needs the people on the other end to understand that this is not a drill. I need EMS standing by at the gate. I have a minor with a fever, possible elevated distress post-incident. I need law enforcement at the gate, uniformed, visible. I need a gate agent from our carrier there who has direct contact with executive. She stopped. No, not a regular gate agent. Someone from executive ops, someone who has been briefed. She listened, then briefed them because that's how long we have. She hung up. She stood still for a moment. Barbara appeared at her shoulder. Karen, Barbara said quietly. I know, Karen said. What do you think she means when she says she'll be reviewing inactions? Karen looked at the galley wall. I think she means exactly what she said. A silence passed between them that carried more weight than either woman was comfortable with. I should have moved them, Karen said. It was not a question. It was not framed as a question. She said it the way people say things they have been trying not to say. I should have moved them immediately. Yes, Barbara said. And because Barbara had been doing this job for many years and had no patience left for anything other than honesty, she didn't add anything softer to that yes. She just let it sit. Karen pressed both hands flat on the galley counter and stared at them. 46 years old. 15 years with this airline. A perfect service record. 2 commendations. 1 flight safety award displayed on the wall of her apartment in a silver frame that her daughter had picked out. And now a child scream that she was going to hear for a very long time. Lily fell asleep again. This time it was real sleep, not the restless, feverish dozing from earlier. She had the cold compress on her forehead, and Franklin, the turtle backpack, tucked under her chin, and her mother's hand over her hand, and she slept. Rachel watched her sleep and did not look away. Tyler checked on them regularly. He timed it. He was not sure why he was timing it, but it felt like the right thing to do, to make sure that the gap between each check was never long enough to feel like abandonment. On one check, Rachel looked up at him and said, "You've been with this airline a couple of years." He blinked. "Yes, ma'am. You're the only one who acted like a human being from the beginning. Before the announcement. Before any of this." She paused. "I want that on record somewhere." Tyler looked at her. Something moved across his face that he didn't entirely control. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett," he said. "I'm sorry it wasn't enough." It was enough for her, Rachel said and looked at Lily. It was enough for me to know that not everyone on this plane decided to look away. Tyler nodded and stepped back. In the galley, out of sight, he put one hand over his eyes and stood there for a moment. He was not sure what he was feeling. Something with a lot of edges. The pilot's voice came over the PA with the standard descent announcement. Tray tables up, seatbacks forward, electronic devices, the ordinary machinery of arrival. But nobody on the flight was paying attention to tray tables. Ronald Brooks unbuckled his seatbelt, reached up for his bag. "Sir!" Karen's voice came from directly beside him. She had materialized at his row with the silent precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "You need to remain seated." Ronald looked at her. "We're not on the ground yet." "That's correct. And until we are, you will remain in your seat. If you attempt to stand again before this aircraft has fully stopped and been directed to the gate, I will have the captain notify ground security." Ronald stared at her. "You're serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything in my professional life," Karen said. And the thing that was different about her voice now, compared to how it had sounded earlier when she had told Rachel she would file a report upon landing, was the thing that happens to a person's voice when they stop managing a situation and start feeling it. Ronald sat down. Nancy Reed had her witness statement already written out in the Notes app on her phone. She had been a high school English teacher for 32 years, and she knew names, exact descriptions of what she had seen. She had even noted the specific angle of Ronald's arm when he reached over the seat. She was going to print it, sign it, and hand-deliver it to whoever needed it the moment she stepped off this plane. She looked toward the front of the cabin where Rachel and Lily were seated. She could see just the top of Rachel's head above the seat back. She thought about what it means to travel with a sick child. The vulnerability of it, the way you are already running on empty before anything else happens. She thought about what it must have felt like to have something like this land on top of that. She thought about the moment Rachel had said she needed help, and the silence that had answered her. Nancy Reed had been on this earth 71 years. She had seen a lot of silences like that one. She had been part of some of them in her younger years before she understood the cost. She was not going to be part of this one. She looked back down at her phone and kept writing. The Indianapolis skyline was visible through the windows on the right side of the plane. The familiar pattern of buildings and roads and tiny cars moving in tiny lanes below. The plane banked slightly, and the runway came into view ahead, long and gray and precise. Rachel felt Lily stir against her. "Mama," Lily said softly, her voice thick with sleep. "Are we there?" "Almost, baby." Lily looked at the window. She watched the ground come up. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in the particular way of a child who has been processing something all along, even when she appeared to be sleeping, "That man was mean to me." Rachel pressed her lips together. "Yes, baby, he was. Why?" Rachel held her daughter tighter. She had been preparing for this question since the moment it happened, and she was not prepared for it at all. She would never be prepared for it. There was no preparation that was equal to the look on her child's face right now. "I don't know," Rachel said. And because she believed in being honest with her daughter, even when honesty was insufficient, even when it left a hole in the answer where comfort should have been, she said it again. "I don't know. But I want you to know that a lot of people on this plane were angry about what he did. A lot of people cared. The lady behind us on the plane cared. The man across the aisle cared. And the woman who talked on the loudspeaker, she cared enough to do something about it right away." Lily thought about this. "Is she nice, the loudspeaker lady?" "I think she's very nice." "Is she gonna make that man say sorry?" Rachel looked out the window. The ground was close now. The trees and the rooftops and the white lines of the runway. I think she's going to do a lot more than that, Rachel said. The wheels touched down at Indianapolis International Airport. The plane rolled along the runway, slowing, turning, moving toward the terminal. And through the small oval window, Rachel Bennett could already see them. The flashing lights, the uniforms, the cluster of official bodies standing at the gate, waiting. She felt Lily take her hand. Mama, there's a lot of police cars. I know. Is that because of us? Rachel looked at her daughter's face, the fever-warm cheeks, the wide, wondering eyes, the small hand in hers still gripping Franklin's strap with her other fist. It's because of what's right, Rachel said. That's all. It's just because of what's right. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and before a single passenger had moved from their seat, before the overhead bins had been opened, before the ordinary ritual of deplaning had begun, the door at the front of the aircraft opened, and 3 uniformed officers stepped aboard. Ronald Brooks watched them come. He watched them move down the aisle with calm, unhurried certainty. He watched the lead officer look at the seat numbers, look at his face, and stop. Ronald Brooks? The cabin was absolutely silent. Ronald said nothing for a few seconds. Then he said, "Yes, sir," the officer said. "We need you to come with us." And in seat 2, at the front of the plane, Lily Bennett watched the officer walk Ronald Brooks up the aisle and out the door. And she turned to her mother and said, in the matter-of-fact voice of a 6-year-old who has just witnessed something she doesn't have words for yet, "Mama, he had to go." He had to go, Rachel agreed. And Rachel Bennett, who had spent the flight holding herself and her daughter together by nothing but will and love, and the bone-deep refusal to be invisible, finally let herself exhale. The gate at Indianapolis International was not prepared for what walked off the flight that morning. Not emotionally, not logistically, not in any of the ways that airport staff prepare for the ordinary chaos. The gate had seen delayed flights and missed connections, and the occasional medical emergency. It had not seen a CEO's decision detonate across a plane full of people and send the wreckage walking through a jetway in real time. Ronald Brooks came off first, flanked by 2 officers. His laptop bag still slung over one shoulder because no one had thought to take it from him yet, and he had grabbed it out of pure muscle memory, the way a man reaches for his things even when his world is ending. He was not handcuffed, not yet. But the officers were close enough on either side of him that the distinction didn't much matter. Every person standing at the gate watched him come through that door, and the watching was not subtle. A gate agent named Mark, a few years with the airline, stood near the check-in desk, with his hands folded and his face professionally still. He had received the briefing a short while ago. Executive operations had called him directly, which had never happened before in his time there, and the woman on the phone had spoken to him in the tone of someone delivering instructions that exist outside the normal chain of command. He had written everything down. He was ready. But watching Ronald Brooks walk out of that jetway, watching the expression on the man's face, the particular cocktail of indignation and dawning terror that Ronald was visibly struggling to manage, Mark found that being ready and being prepared were 2 entirely different things. Behind Ronald came the officers. Behind the officers came Tyler, who had walked with Rachel and Lily to the front of the plane and was now standing just inside the jetway door. And then Rachel came through, carrying Lily on her hip, and the EMS personnel who had been waiting stepped forward immediately. "Miss Bennett?" A paramedic, a woman, professional and direct. "I'm Tina. I'm going to take a look at your daughter, okay? Is that all right?" Rachel nodded and felt something in her shoulders release that had been locked since boarding. Ronald was taken to a small room off the main gate area. Not an interrogation room, just an office. The kind of beige, fluorescent-lit space that exists in every airport in the country for situations that don't fit neatly into any other category. He sat in a chair across from an Indianapolis Metropolitan Police officer named Sergeant Mike Thompson, who had years on the force and the particular unhurried energy of a man who has seen most things and is not impressed by any of them. "Mr. Brooks," Sergeant Thompson said, setting a notepad on the table between them. "Why don't you walk me through what happened on that flight?" Ronald had been composing his version in his head. He delivered it now with the careful precision of a man who has convinced himself that what he is about to say is reasonable. "The child in front of me was kicking my seat for most of the flight. I asked the mother twice to control her daughter. She didn't. The child kept kicking. I reached forward and tapped her legs to get her to stop. That was it. A tap." Sergeant Thompson wrote something on the notepad. "A tap. Yes. Witnesses describe it as a slap and then a kick. Witnesses are wrong. 6 witnesses, Mr. Brooks." Ronald's jaw moved. "I tapped her legs and then later the child bumped back into my seat, and I may have made contact again, but it was not a kick. I have no idea where that word is coming from." Sergeant Thompson put down his pen and looked at Ronald for a long moment without speaking. It was the kind of look that doesn't need words because the words are already implied. Ronald held the look for a few seconds before he looked away. "The child is 6 years old," Sergeant Thompson said. "She had a fever. I didn't know she had a fever." "Did you know she was 6? Silence. "Mr. Brooks, did you know the child was 6 years old?" "She looked young, yes. And it was your position that the appropriate response to a young child shifting in her seat was to physically make contact with her body. I told you it was a tap." Sergeant Thompson picked up his pen again. In the first aid station 2 gates down, Lily was sitting on a paper-covered examination table with a thermometer under her arm, and the EMS paramedic, Tina, crouched in front of her, making a game out of the blood pressure cuff. Rachel stood a couple feet away, arms crossed over her chest, watching every movement with the focused attention of a mother who has been running on adrenaline and is not ready to stop yet. "She's elevated, but not dangerous," Tina said, reading the thermometer. "She's dehydrated. Has she had fluids today?" "Juice boxes on the plane. She didn't drink much." "Okay. We're going to get her some water and keep her here for a bit, just to monitor. If the fever stays where it is and doesn't climb, you're fine to continue your day. If it breaks higher, I want you at an urgent care." Rachel nodded. She came to the table and took Lily's hand. Lily was looking at the blood pressure cuff with genuine scientific interest, which was such a recognizable Lily expression that Rachel almost laughed. Almost. "Mama," Lily said without looking up from the cuff, "is Grandma Evelyn going to be worried?" "I already texted Grandma Evelyn. She knows we landed. Did you tell her about the man?" "I'll tell her everything when we get there." Lily considered this. Is she going to be mad? Rachel thought about her mother Evelyn, 71 years old with a fresh hip replacement and a temper that had never once backed down from anything in 71 years of living. "Yes," Rachel said. "She is going to be very, very mad." Lily seemed satisfied with this. "Good," she said. And the firmness in that small voice, the matter-of-fact justice of it, did something to Rachel's chest that the entire terrible morning had not quite managed to do. Her face crumpled. She turned away for a couple seconds, got herself back, and turned around again. Tina, who had seen a lot in her years as a paramedic, looked briefly at the ceiling and said nothing. Back at the gate, Nancy Reed was standing at a counter giving her written statement to a second officer, a younger man who was transcribing it onto an official form, while Nancy read from the Notes app on her phone. She had pages. She was on the second one. The officer had stopped trying to keep up and was now simply documenting as fast as he could. "I want to be clear," Nancy said, looking up from her phone, "that I was seated in row 13, seat C, which placed me directly adjacent to and behind the mother and child. I had an unobstructed view of the incident. I saw the passenger in the seat behind them, the individual now in your custody, reach over the top of the seat with his right hand and strike the child's legs. The sound was audible. The child woke screaming. I then observed the same individual drive his foot forward into the back of the seat, which I believe made contact with the child's back. At this point, the child lurched forward. The officer looked up. You're saying he kicked the seat while the child was pressed against it? I'm saying his foot went into that seat with enough force that the child's body moved, Nancy said. You can characterize it however the law characterizes it. I'm telling you what I saw. The officer wrote it down. I also want to state for the record, Nancy continued, that the flight attendant who initially responded, the lead attendant, did not immediately separate the passenger from the mother and child, did not move them to different seats, and did not take any visible action against the aggressor. That changed after the CEO's announcement, but the first part of that crew's response was inadequate, and I think that needs to be part of whatever record exists from today. The officer looked at her. Are you an attorney, ma'am? Nancy smiled thinly. Retired English teacher, 32 years. We learned to say exactly what we mean. The call that Elizabeth Grant had been waiting for came in. It was from her head of human resources, a man named Paul Harris, who had spent the time pulling crew files, reviewing the incident timeline, and preparing a briefing that he had hoped, with the particular optimism of someone who doesn't yet understand how serious the situation is, that his boss might find sufficient grounds for a formal warning rather than what was coming. He understood in the first moments of the call that he had miscalculated. Paul, Elizabeth said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has made a decision and needs other people to understand that the decision is final. Tell me what you have. Paul told her. Lead attendant Karen Ellis had received the mother's complaint, spoken briefly with the passenger, and determined the appropriate course of action was to file an incident report upon landing. She had not moved the family. She had not escalated to the captain. She had not separated the aggressor from the victim. The remaining crew, with the exception of one junior attendant, had followed her lead or absented themselves from the situation entirely. The exception, Elizabeth said. Tyler. Yes, he provided comfort to the child and the mother. Suggested the seat move before Ellis did. And when the move happened, he facilitated it. His conduct during the incident was appropriate. Good. He stays. A pause. The rest of them, Paul? Paul exhaled. Elizabeth. Karen Ellis has years with us. A clean record. 2 commendations. I know her record. I pulled it myself. Elizabeth's voice did not change tone. She watched a grown man hit a 6-year-old child and decided that a form was the appropriate response. Whatever she is on paper, whatever her record says, that is not the person I need representing this airline. I understand that, but employment law requires get legal on the phone. Tell them what we're doing. Get the severance packages structured correctly and make sure everything is documented according to procedure. But, Paul, she stopped. The crew? All of them except the one who helped. Today. A silence that lasted just long enough for Paul Harris to understand that he was not going to change her mind. Today, he said. Today. Nobody told Karen Ellis right away. She landed, deplaned with the rest of the crew, and was met at the gate by Mark, the gate agent, who directed her to a separate area off the main terminal. Michelle and Barbara were already there. They were sitting in chairs, and neither of them was speaking to the other. The silence between them had the particular density of people who know something is coming and are trying to decide whether acknowledging it would make it come faster. Karen sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at Barbara. "Did you know she was going to do this?" Karen asked. Barbara looked at the wall. "I knew something was coming. On the plane, when I talked to him, I thought I was de-escalating. Karen, I thought that was the right call. Keep everyone calm. Handle it on the ground." Karen. Barbara's voice was not unkind, but it was not gentle either. "We both know that wasn't de-escalation. De-escalation was moving that mother and her child the second she told you what happened. What we did was manage the situation. There's a difference." Karen looked at her hands, the commendation on her wall. 2 of them. She had started with this airline years ago. She had worked through turbulence and diversions and medical emergencies that she had handled with precision and calm and professionalism and had been recognized for both. She had built an entire professional identity around being good at the things she did, and in the space of that flight, she had discovered something about herself that she had not previously been required to know. "I looked away," she said quietly. Barbara said nothing. "I looked at that little girl, and I looked at him, and I made a calculation. I wanted to keep things calm. I didn't want a confrontation at cruising altitude. I told myself it was professional judgment." She stopped. "It wasn't." Barbara looked at her hands. "No," she said. "It wasn't." Paul Harris arrived at the crew holding area. He was carrying a folder. He had a second HR representative with him, a woman named Sandra Miller, who handled separations and had the particular composure of someone whose job requires them to deliver bad news with consistency and care. Paul introduced himself to the assembled crew, and Sandra set 4 folders on the table. Not 5, 4. Karen Ellis looked at the folders. She looked at Paul. She understood immediately. "Tyler isn't here," she said. "No," Paul said. Michelle looked at the folders. She was the youngest of the crew, and her face right now looked younger. "Are those what I think they are?" "I want to explain the situation clearly and fairly," Paul said, and proceeded to do exactly that. He used the careful, measured language that HR professionals spend their careers developing for moments like this. He said that the airline had reviewed the incident. He said that the conduct of the crew during the incident did not meet the standards of care that Horizon Airlines required of its employees. He said that effective immediately, the employment of the 4 crew members present was terminated with full severance packages in accordance with their contracts and all applicable employment protections. Barbara picked up her folder without a word. She opened it. She read it. She set it down. She looked at no one in particular and said very quietly, "All those years." "Barbara," Paul said, and his voice was careful. "Your record don't—" Barbara held up one hand. The hand was steady. "I know what my record says, and I know what I did today. Those 2 things are both true. I don't need you to soften either one of them for me." Paul closed his mouth. Michelle had not opened her folder. She was staring at it with both hands in her lap. She made a sound that was not quite a sob, but was not far from one. Karen picked up her folder. She held it in both hands and felt the weight of it, which was nothing. Paper and plastic, essentially nothing. She looked at Paul Harris across the table. "Is there anything I can say?" she asked. Not demanding, not arguing, just asking. Paul looked at her steadily. Ms. Grant's decision was final. I understand. Karen set the folder in front of her. I want to say something anyway, and you don't have to put it anywhere. I want to say that I know I got it wrong. I'm not saying this to change the outcome. I'm saying it because it's true. And because the only thing that's worse than making the wrong call is not being honest about why you made it. She paused. I was afraid of making it worse. I was afraid of what would happen if I confronted him directly. I told myself that was wisdom. It wasn't. It was fear dressed up as professionalism, and a 6-year-old girl paid for it. She looked down at the table. That's what I want on record, if anything is going on any record. Nobody spoke for a moment. Sandra Miller, who in her years of HR work had overseen more terminations than she could count, and had trained herself to feel them as events rather than tragedies, was writing something in her own notepad. She was not looking up, but her pen had stopped moving. And when she began writing again, she was writing something that was not in the standard termination documentation. She was writing Karen Ellis's words down verbatim. She wasn't sure why. She just knew she should. Rachel Bennett did not know any of this yet. She was sitting in a plastic chair in the first aid station with Lily in her lap, finally fully asleep, her temperature down a bit, her breathing even and slow. An airport chaplain had come by, an older man with a soft voice, and Rachel had let him sit with her for a few minutes without talking. Sometimes the presence of another person is the thing you need, and conversation would only dilute it. Her phone had been buzzing without stopping. She had turned it face down on the chair beside her. Whatever was happening out there in the world of the internet and the spreading wave of Nancy Reed's witness account and a young woman's Twitter thread and the first reporters who had already started calling the airline's press office, all of that could wait. Her daughter was sleeping. The fever was still there, but not climbing. They were on the ground. A woman appeared in the doorway of the first aid station. She was in her early 50s, well-dressed, and she had the posture of someone who spends a lot of time being the most senior person in any given room. She had a security escort on either side of her and a face that was open and direct in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. Rachel looked at her. "Miss Bennett," the woman said, "my name is Elizabeth Grant." Rachel stared at her. She had heard the voice on the plane. She had heard it come through the speakers above her while her daughter cried in her lap. She had heard it and felt it land in her chest like something she hadn't known she was waiting for. And now, here was the person attached to that voice, standing in a first aid station doorway in Indianapolis at the airport. "You're here," Rachel said. It was all she said. Elizabeth Grant did not say anything polished or corporate or careful. She looked at Lily asleep in her mother's arms, and then she looked at Rachel, and she said, "I got on a plane the moment I ended the call. I'm so sorry I wasn't faster." Something in the cadence of that, the specific logic of it. I'm sorry I wasn't faster. Not, I'm sorry this happened. Not, the airline deeply regrets. But the personal and precise admission that there were minutes she wished she had back. Something in that undid something in Rachel that she had been holding close since boarding. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't have the energy left for loud. She just cried. Her face turned slightly toward Lily's hair, her shoulders shaking with the quiet, thorough grief of someone who has been strong for a very long time, in a situation where no one should have been required to be strong. Elizabeth Grant crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside her. She did not reach over and touch her, because they were strangers, but she stayed. She stayed and she did not speak, and she did not reach for the folder that her assistant had ready The compensation forms and the legal documents and the formal apology that the airline's legal team had drafted. She left all of that alone. She just sat. After a while, Lily shifted in her sleep and opened her eyes partway and looked at Elizabeth Grant with the unfocused, evaluating gaze of a child who has just woken up. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Elizabeth said. "Are you the loudspeaker lady?" Elizabeth looked at Rachel for just a moment, something passing across her face that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. "Yes," she said. "I'm the loudspeaker lady." Lily looked at her for another moment, then she said, "Thank you for being loud." And Elizabeth Grant, CEO, a woman who had sat through board meetings and investor calls and crisis management sessions that would have leveled most people, felt her throat close in a way it had not closed in a very long time. "You're welcome," she said, and her voice, for just that one sentence, was not a CEO's voice at all. It was just a person's. 2 gates away, Sergeant Mike Thompson was completing his arrest report on Ronald Brooks, who had now been formally charged with assault on a minor. Ronald had asked for a lawyer, which was his right, and the room had gotten much quieter after that. His lawyer, a man he had reached by phone who operated out of Indianapolis and had the harried energy of someone who had not expected this kind of call, was being patched in by phone. Ronald sat in the chair with his arms crossed and his laptop bag on the floor beside him and said nothing while his attorney spoke. Outside that door, however, things were not quiet at all. The airline's press office had been fielding calls. The Twitter thread that the young woman on the plane had started had jumped to thousands of retweets. A local Indianapolis news van had been spotted at the airport entrance. National outlets had already sent requests for comment to the airline's media address. And in the pocket of Ronald Brooks's khaki pants, his personal phone was vibrating with a frequency that suggested the outside world had found him. His employer in Indianapolis had called multiple times. His sister had called. A number he didn't recognize had called several times. He was not allowed to answer any of them. In the hiring department of his pharmaceutical supply company in Indianapolis, a senior manager named Carol Whitfield was in a closed-door meeting with the company's general counsel. On the conference table between them was a printout of Nancy Reed's witness statement, which had been posted publicly online. Carol Whitfield was reading it for the 3rd time. She had read enough to know what the meeting was about. Ronald Brooks did not know about that meeting yet. He would know soon. Tyler was sitting alone at a gate 4 terminals down, waiting for his deadhead flight back to Chicago. He had his uniform jacket folded over his knees and his phone in his hands, and he was reading messages. His phone had also been lighting up, but for different reasons. Passengers from the flight had apparently found his name through the airline's website or through Nancy Reed, who had mentioned him by name in her statement, or through each other. And a thread had formed organized around a single question that Rachel Bennett had raised at the gate before she was taken to the first aid station. The question was, who on that crew acted right? The answer, repeated across messages from people Tyler had never met, was his name. He read them slowly. He had been on the phone with his mother in Lagos, who had heard something on social media and called immediately. And the conversation had gone the way conversations with his mother went, which was that she said what she thought directly and without softening. And then she said she was proud of him. And somehow, even in the middle of all of this, that had made him feel steadier than anything else had. He had spent a couple of years being relatively invisible in this job, doing it well, believing it mattered. And here was a day when it turned out that invisibility had not been the whole story after all. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at the departure board. His flight was soon. He had time to sit here and be a person who had done one ordinary thing in an extraordinary moment and had not looked away. He thought about Lily and her fever and the way she had almost smiled when he mentioned Franklin. He thought about Rachel's face when she said he was the only one who had acted like a human being. He thought about the fact that he was going to get on a plane and go back to his life, and that his life was going to be exactly what it had been that morning, except for one thing. He was going to know something about himself that he hadn't been tested on before. He sat with that. And when the boarding call came, he stood up, folded his jacket over his arm, and walked toward the gate with the particular quiet dignity of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. The story broke nationally in the afternoon, not the Twitter thread, which had already been circulating and had crossed thousands of retweets, not the local Indianapolis news van that had been filming from the airport entrance. The story broke nationally when a producer at a major cable news network received Nancy Reed's witness statement, read it in its entirety, and immediately picked up the phone to call her on-air correspondent in Chicago. The correspondent's name was Angela Voss, and she had been in this business for years, which meant she had developed the particular instinct of someone who knows within the first moments of reading something, whether it is a story or the story. She read Nancy's statement while standing at her kitchen counter eating lunch, and she set down her fork on the third paragraph and did not pick it up again. By the time she was in front of a camera, the headline that appeared on screen behind her was simple. It said, "CEO fires crew after passenger assaults Black child on flight," and below it, in smaller text, "Arrest made. Airline CEO personally travels to Indianapolis." And below that, smaller still, the detail that was already spreading faster than anything else. One attendant spared. The one who helped. Rachel Bennett did not see the broadcast. She was in a car arranged by the airline, Lily asleep across her lap, heading toward her mother's house in the South Indianapolis suburbs. Elizabeth Grant had stayed with them for a while in the first aid station, and in that time, she had said things that Rachel would remember for the rest of her life, and also said a great deal that was practical and logistical and necessary. The airline's legal team would be in contact. There would be formal documentation. There would be compensation. Significant compensation. And Elizabeth had said that word without the clipped, careful tone of a lawyer managing liability, and instead with the blunt directness of someone who understands that some things cannot be undone, and the only honest response to that is to say so. "I want you to know something," Elizabeth had said near the end of their time together while Lily slept, and Rachel held her daughter and the airport moved and breathed around them like a living thing. "What I did today, getting on that plane, coming here, that was not a PR decision. I want to be very clear about that. My communications team wanted me on a call, not on a flight. They wanted a press statement, not a personal appearance. I overruled them." She paused. "I overruled them because a child was hurt on one of my planes, and I needed to look her mother in the eye. That's the only reason." Rachel had looked at her for a long moment. "Did you always make decisions like that?" Elizabeth's expression shifted. Something behind it moved. "No," she said. "I didn't always. I learned." Rachel didn't ask what had taught her. Some things you don't ask, but she filed it away, the way you file things that feel important even when you don't yet understand their full weight. The car pulled out of the airport. Lily didn't wake up. Evelyn Bennett was standing at the front door when the car pulled up. She had been standing there. She had hip replacement surgery a short while ago, and her doctor had told her to limit her standing time. And she had listened to that instruction with the same respect she gave most instructions that conflicted with something she considered important, which was to say she had ignored it completely. She was 71 years old, a retired school principal, and she had the posture of a woman who has spent decades being the authority in any room she entered. She had raised Rachel alone from the time Rachel was young after her husband passed, and she had raised her daughter to be strong and careful and honest. and to never, under any circumstances, make herself small for anyone. She had been getting those qualities back in the text messages Rachel had sent from the airport. The careful, factual updates that told Evelyn everything about the situation and nothing about how Rachel was actually feeling, which was how Rachel always communicated when she was holding herself together. Evelyn knew exactly how her daughter was feeling. She always did. The car stopped. Rachel got out, still carrying Lily. Lily stirred and opened her eyes and saw her grandmother in the doorway. "Grandma Evelyn?" Lily said. Evelyn Bennett came down the steps from her front door, hip replacement and all, and she took her granddaughter from Rachel's arms, and she held her, and she said nothing for a moment, just held her and pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, and kept them there long enough to feel the warmth. "She's still warm," Evelyn said. "She needs soup, and she needs to sleep in a real bed." Evelyn looked at Rachel over Lily's head. The look passed between them the way looks pass between mothers and daughters who have been reading each other for decades. "And you need to sit down before you fall down." Rachel didn't argue. She followed her mother into the house. Ronald Brooks's lawyer arrived at Indianapolis International. His name was Frank Delaney, and he was a defense attorney based in Indianapolis who had spent years handling cases that ranged from DUI to corporate fraud, and who had the slightly rumpled, permanently caffeinated appearance of a man who was, always, on some level, preparing for trial. He had listened to Ronald's account on the phone during the drive from the private parking lot to the terminal, and he had asked questions, and the answers to those questions had told him most of what he needed to know. "How many witnesses?" Frank asked. The police said 6. "Are any of the airline employees?" "One of the flight attendants, maybe. I don't know." "The others are passengers?" "Yes." Frank wrote something. "The child is 6. "Yes." "And she had a fever at the time." Ronald's jaw tightened. "I didn't know about the fever when it happened." "It doesn't matter when you knew. It matters that it's in the record now." Frank looked at him. "Ronald, I need you to understand something clearly. The physical facts of this case are not your strongest territory. 6 witnesses, a sick child, a CEO who flew in personally, and is currently sitting in an airport giving interviews." He paused. "That last part is the one that's going to make everything else harder." Ronald looked up. "What interviews?" Frank turned his legal pad around. He had a news alert pulled up on the screen. The headline behind Angela Voss's shoulder. The words, "CEO fires crew after passenger assaults, black child on flight." Ronald stared at the screen. He stared at it for a long time. The color in his face changed. "She did the interview already?" he said. "She's been doing interviews. They're calling it an assault. You have been charged with assault on a minor. That is the legal characterization of the event." "Yes." Frank picked up his pen again. "Your employer in Indianapolis called me directly before I landed. Carol Whitfield, senior manager." Ronald looked at the pad. "What did she say?" Frank Delaney, who in his years had delivered a great number of pieces of bad news to a great number of clients, set his pen down and said the next sentence in the level, precise tone of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "She said to tell you that effective this afternoon, your employment with the company has been terminated pending the outcome of any legal proceedings, and that the company statement." During those seconds, Ronald Brooks' face moved through its second sequence of rapid changes in one day. And this time, the final destination was not indignation or calculation or smugly settled contempt. It was something that looked, for the first time, like the beginning of understanding. "They fired me," he said. "Yes." "I've been with that company for years." Frank looked at him without expression. "I know. I have a sales record that—" "Ronald." Frank's voice was quiet but precise. Your sales record is not going to be the thing people discuss when they look up your name from this point forward. What people are going to find when they search your name is a news headline. And the headline says that you kicked a sick 6-year-old girl on an airplane. He picked up his pen. Now, let's talk about how we handle what comes next. The press conference that Horizon Airlines held was not planned. Press conferences that are truly planned have podiums and prepared remarks, and a communications team that has run drafts of every sentence through legal review. This one had a table, 2 microphones, and Elizabeth Grant, who had returned from the first aid station to the airport's executive conference room and had sat with her communications director, a woman named Priya Chandra, before Priya had said, with the resigned honesty of someone who knows when preparation has become a delay tactic, "You don't need a script. Just say what you said to me in the car, on the way here." Elizabeth had thought about that for a moment and then said, "All right." She sat at the table now with Priya beside her and a cluster of cameras and reporters filling the room, and she spoke the way she had spoken to Rachel in the first aid station, directly, without the buffer of corporate language. Earlier today, a passenger on one of our flights physically struck a 6-year-old child. The child was sick. She was sleeping. The man who struck her has been arrested and charged with assault on a minor. Those are the facts. She paused. The additional fact that I have to acknowledge, and that I am not going to minimize or explain away, is that our crew did not respond adequately in the immediate aftermath of that incident. The mother asked for help. She was told a report would be filed upon landing. Her daughter had just been hit by a grown man, and our crew's response was paperwork. Another pause. That is not what this airline stands for. It is not what I stand for. And the crew members responsible for that failure are no longer employed by Horizon Airlines as of this afternoon. A reporter near the front raised her hand. All of them? The entire crew? 4 of the 5 crew members on that flight have been terminated. Yes. What about the 5th? Elizabeth looked directly at the camera. The 5th crew member, Tyler, acted appropriately and with genuine human decency throughout this incident. He provided care and comfort to the child and her mother when no one else did. He is not only still employed, I will be personally recommending him for our highest crew commendation. A second reporter, can you speak to the compensation offered to the family? I will not discuss the specifics of what we've offered the family in this setting. What I will say is that our commitment to them goes beyond compensation. I sat with Ms. Bennett and her daughter this afternoon. What that family went through today is not something that a check resolves. Our ongoing responsibility to them is something I take personally. A third reporter, louder than the others. There are people saying this incident reflects a broader pattern of airlines failing black passengers. Do you believe that's true? The room got very quiet. Elizabeth Grant did not look away from the camera. She did not reach for careful language. She said, "I believe that a black mother asked for help and was told to wait. I believe her daughter was hurt, and the people responsible for their safety on that plane chose conflict avoidance over justice. Whether that is a pattern or an individual failure, I cannot tell you with certainty. What I can tell you is that on my airline today, it happened. And the response to something happening is not to debate whether it is a pattern. The response is to fix it and to make sure it cannot happen the same way again." She paused. I am committed to that. Personally committed, not institutionally, not in a press statement. Personally. The room was quiet for another few seconds. Then every hand went up at once. Evelyn Bennett watched the press conference from her living room with Lily asleep on the couch beside her, and a bowl of chicken soup going cold on the coffee table. Rachel was in the kitchen. Evelyn had sent her there under the pretense of needing help with something, but really because she could see that her daughter needed to be doing something with her hands. needed to be in a room where she could be alone with what she was feeling without an audience. Evelyn watched Elizabeth Grant on the screen. She watched the way the woman held herself. She watched the directness of her eyes and listened to every word. And when Elizabeth said, "Personally committed, not institutionally," Evelyn made a sound in the back of her throat that was, for Evelyn Bennett, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Lily stirred on the couch. She looked at the television with half-open eyes. "Grandma Evelyn," she said, "is that the loudspeaker lady?" "Yes, baby." Lily watched for a moment. "She has a nice voice." "She does." "Is she saying sorry for what happened?" Evelyn looked at her granddaughter. Decades of living and raising and fighting and watching and knowing moved through her in that moment. And she said the thing that was truest. "She's doing more than sorry, baby. She's doing something." Lily considered this with the gravity of a child processing a complex concept. "That's better than sorry," she said. "That is a whole lot better than sorry." Lily put her head back on the pillow. "I'm hungry," she said. "Can I have the soup now?" And Evelyn Bennett laughed, full and real, for the first time all day. She picked up the bowl and carried it to her granddaughter, and the laugh was still in her chest when Rachel came in from the kitchen and stopped in the doorway and looked at them both. And something in Rachel's face that had been held tight all day finally loosened. The Twitter thread had hundreds of thousands of retweets. Nancy Reed's statement had been downloaded and shared on multiple platforms. The term Horizon Airlines was the #1 trending topic nationally. The clip of Elizabeth Grant's press conference, specifically the seconds in which she said, "The response to something happening is not to debate whether it is a pattern," had been viewed millions of times. Ronald Brooks's name was now public. It had been made public not by the airline and not by the police department, but by the young woman who had been sitting 2 rows behind him on the plane, and whose Twitter thread had included a photograph of the seat number placard above his row and the back of Ronald's head, which it was enough. The internet found the rest. His LinkedIn profile had been screenshot and shared thousands of times. His professional headshot, which had been on his company's website that morning, was no longer on his company's website. The pharmaceutical supply company in Indianapolis had posted a statement saying they were deeply troubled by the allegations and had parted ways with the individual in question. And that statement had itself been screenshot and shared because the internet has a particular appetite for the word allegations in contexts where 6 witnesses and an arrest report exist. Ronald's sister, whose calls he had not been able to answer in the airport office, had posted her own statement on Facebook. She had not written it to defend him. She had written it to say that she loved her brother, and that what she had seen described was not the person she thought she knew, and that she was praying. That post had hundreds of comments. Most of them were kind to her. None of them were kind to Ronald. Ronald Brooks and his attorney, Frank Delaney, left the airport through a side entrance. Ronald had his laptop bag over one shoulder and his collar turned up, which did nothing to prevent the camera crews that had been watching the side entrance from getting the footage they needed. He walked quickly. Frank walked beside him, saying nothing. The cameras followed them to the car. Ronald did not look up. Karen Ellis drove home to her apartment in South Indianapolis in silence. She had turned off the radio before she left the airport parking lot, because every station she scanned seemed to be discussing the same story, and she had heard enough. She drove in silence, and she thought about the drive home from work on all the days before this one. The ordinary, unremarkable quality of professional life when you believe you are doing your job well. And she thought about how quickly and completely that quality can be stripped away. She parked. She sat in the car for a few minutes without moving. Then she took out her phone and called her daughter, who was 24 years old and lived in another city and had been texting her mother with a combination of concern and questions that Karen had not had the capacity to answer. The phone rang twice. "Mom? Mom, are you okay? I've been seeing stuff online." "I'm okay," Karen said. "I'm parked outside the apartment." "What happened?" "They're saying, Mom, I need to know you're okay." "I'm okay." She stopped. "I lost my job today." A pause. "Mom, I want to tell you why." Karen looked through the windshield at the parking lot. It was an ordinary parking lot. It was the parking lot she had pulled into countless times. "I want to tell you exactly what happened, and exactly why I did what I did, and exactly why it was wrong. Because I want you to understand both things, what happened and why it was wrong. I need you to understand both." Her daughter was quiet on the other end. Then, "Okay, Mom, I'm listening." And in a parked car in South Indianapolis, with the evening coming in gray and quiet through the windshield, Karen Ellis told her daughter everything. She did not soften it. She did not explain it in a way that made herself smaller or larger than she was. She told it the way Nancy Reed had told it, and the way Elizabeth Grant had told it, in the only way that matters when the thing you are describing is true. Directly, with both eyes open. Elizabeth Grant was in a car heading back to the airport when her phone rang. It was the number for her board chairman, a man named Harrison Briggs, who was 70 years old and had been in the airline industry since Elizabeth was in college, and who communicated exclusively in one of two modes, which were either very brief approval or very pointed concern. "Elizabeth," he said, "I watched the press conference. Harrison, you terminated Ellis. I terminated 4 crew members, yes." A pause. "Employment Counsel is going to have questions about the process. Sandra Miller ran full procedure. Everything is documented. It will hold." Another pause. "You personally flew to Indianapolis." "I did. Priya says the press response has been largely positive so far." "I didn't do it for the press response." Harrison Briggs was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the boardroom quality and was something slightly closer to human. "No, I don't suppose you did." A beat. "The stock is up since the press conference. I genuinely do not care about that right now, Harrison." "I know." And something in his voice told her that he did actually know. "I'm calling because I wanted you to hear it from me directly, that the board is behind you, fully. What you did today was right." Elizabeth looked out of the car window at Indianapolis moving past her. The streets and the houses and the ordinary evening of a city that did not know. It had been part of something today. "Thank you, Harrison. How was she, the mother?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "Remarkable," she said. She was absolutely remarkable. Rachel had eaten finally. Evelyn had made her eat the same way Evelyn had been making Rachel do necessary things since Rachel was young, with the particular combination of firmness and love that does not leave room for argument. They had sat at the kitchen table together, the 3 of them, Evelyn and Rachel and a half-awake Lily who ate spoonfuls of soup and then put her head down on her folded arms and went back to sleep at the table. Rachel had eaten her own soup and looked at her daughter's sleeping face and not said anything for a long time. Evelyn watched her from across the table. She knew her daughter was in that place that comes after the adrenaline, the hollow, slightly unreal space where your body has stopped performing emergency functions and is trying to figure out what comes next. "Talk to me," Evelyn said. Rachel looked at her. "I keep thinking about the moment I asked for help," she said. "I stood in that aisle and I said, 'Someone help me.' And I looked at those flight attendants and they—" She stopped. "I have asked for help before in my life in a lot of different situations. And I have had people turn away before. I know what that looks like. But there was something about being in the air with Lily sick in my arms and having that man 3 feet away from us. She pressed her lips together. I felt very alone. Evelyn was quiet. And then the loudspeaker came on, Rachel said. And it sounds like such a small thing when I say it out loud, hearing a voice on a loudspeaker. But it wasn't small. It was... She looked down at the table. It was like someone finally turned the lights on. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over Rachel's. She had a particular way of holding her daughter's hand, had had it since Rachel was small, her thumb moving in a slow circle on the back of Rachel's hand, the way you do when words are insufficient. You weren't alone, Evelyn said. You were never alone. You just couldn't see the people standing with you yet. Rachel looked at her mother's face. The man who made the call, James Whitaker. I never even thanked him properly. You'll find him. How do you know? Because you're your mother's daughter, Evelyn said. And your mother's daughter does not leave things unfinished. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and one of her hands opened and closed on the table like she was reaching for something. Rachel put 2 fingers into her daughter's palm and felt the small hand close around them. James Whitaker was home in Chicago, sitting in his favorite chair with a glass of water on the table beside him and his phone face up on his knee. He had watched the press conference on his laptop. He had read the articles. He had watched the clip of Elizabeth Grant's words multiple times, not because he needed to, but because there was something in those words that felt important to witness properly. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. Then he opened it. It said, Mr. Whitaker, this is Rachel Bennett. Tyler gave me your number. I've been trying to find the right words since we landed, and I don't think there are right words, so I'm just going to say the ones I have. You made a phone call today when no one else did. Because of that phone call, my daughter heard a voice on a loudspeaker telling her she mattered. I need you to know that. I need you to know what that phone call actually was from where I was sitting. It was someone refusing to look away. Thank you, Rachel. James Whitaker read the message twice. He set the phone on the table. He looked at the wall of his living room, which had on it, among other things, a photograph from years ago, and a framed letter and 2 things that belonged to people who were no longer alive. And he thought about looking away, and he thought about what it costs, and what it costs when you don't. He picked up the phone and typed back, Miss Bennett, please tell Lily that Franklin is a very good name for a turtle. James Whitaker. He set the phone down. He picked up his glass. He sat in the quiet of his house and felt the day settle around him like something completed. And somewhere in a house in South Indianapolis, a 6-year-old girl with a fever and a turtle-shaped backpack was sleeping in a real bed at last, with her grandmother's quilt pulled up to her chin, and the sound of her mother's voice and her grandmother's voice coming softly from the next room. And outside the window, the ordinary darkness of an ordinary night in a city that had today, without planning to, been the place where one small and enormous thing had finally gone the right way. Lily's fever broke in the early morning. Rachel knew the exact time because she had been awake sitting in the chair beside Lily's bed. The way she had been sitting for most of the night watching her daughter breathe, measuring the rhythm of it the way mothers measure things that matter with every cell they have. She had her hand resting lightly on Lily's back, and she felt the moment it happened, felt the subtle shift in her daughter's body, the way the heat that had been radiating off Lily's skin quietly receded like a tide going out. Rachel pressed her palm flat between her daughter's shoulder blades and held it there for a long moment. Then she dropped her head forward and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since Chicago. She sat in that chair until the first gray light came through the curtains. She did not sleep. She did not try to. She just sat with her daughter in the dark and let the silence of the house hold her. And for the first time in a day, she allowed herself to be still. Evelyn found her there in the morning, still in the chair, both of her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee she had forgotten to drink. Evelyn looked at her daughter and then at Lily, and then back at Rachel with the reading look, the look that needed no words. "Fever broke," Rachel said. Evelyn closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were wet, and she didn't acknowledge that. She walked to Rachel and put her hand on top of Rachel's head, the way she had done when Rachel was small, and Rachel leaned into it the way she always had. And they stayed like that for a moment in the gray morning light, with Lily sleeping peacefully between them. "Now you sleep," Evelyn said. "I'm okay." "Rachel." "Mama, You have been okay all day," Evelyn said. "You can stop being okay for a few hours. I have her." Rachel looked at her mother's face, 71 years old, a short while out of hip surgery, standing in this room in the morning because her daughter and granddaughter needed her. Rachel thought about what it means to be built by a person, what it means to carry someone else's strength so deep inside yourself that you don't always know where theirs ends and yours begins. "Okay," Rachel said. "A few hours." She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. The morning news cycle had not slowed overnight. If anything, it had accelerated the way stories do when they land in the particular intersection of race and justice and corporate accountability and a CEO who had done something unexpected, and a child who was 6 years old and had said, "Thank you for being loud." That last detail, which Elizabeth Grant had shared in a brief follow-up comment to one reporter the previous afternoon, had spread with the particular velocity of things that are simple and true and devastating in equal measure. "Thank you for being loud." It was on the front page of newspapers by morning. It was the subject of opinion columns that had been filed overnight and published. A child psychologist on a morning talk show was explaining what it means for a child to hear authority validate her pain. And the host of the show was nodding and trying not to cry. And millions of people were watching at home doing the same thing. Angela Voss had a second segment. She had Nancy Reed on by phone. Nancy, who had slept and woken up to notifications on her phone and a voicemail from her daughter who had seen the story online, spoke for minutes in the calm, precise cadence of a woman who has been using language accurately for decades and sees no reason to change that now. "I want people to understand something," Nancy said. "The bravery in this story is not the CEO's. The CEO did the right thing and she deserves credit for that. But the bravery was the mother's. Rachel Bennett sat on that plane and asked for help in a situation where asking for help takes everything you have. She did not look away from what happened. She did not go quiet. She asked for help. And then when the help that came was inadequate, she asked again. And again. That is not a small thing. That is an enormous thing." Angela Voss said, "Do you think she heard you say that?" Nancy paused. "I hope so," she said. "I've been thinking about her since yesterday morning. I've been thinking about that little girl. And I've been thinking about all the times I was on a plane or in a store or in a room and something happened that I told myself was not my business, and I looked away." A pause. "I'm 71 years old. I have looked away more times than I want to count. Yesterday, I didn't. And I want everyone listening to understand that the only difference between yesterday and all those other times was a decision. Just a decision. Nothing more complicated than that." Lily woke up and immediately asked for biscuits. Evelyn laughed so hard she had to put down the mixing bowl. She made the biscuits from scratch the way she had been making them for decades. and Lily sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas with Franklin the turtle backpack on the chair beside her, and ate biscuits with butter, and told Evelyn a very detailed story about a dream she'd had involving a talking airport cart. Evelyn listened to every word with the focused attention of someone for whom this, right now, this ordinary morning of biscuits and a child's dream was the most important thing in the world. Rachel slept until later. She woke up slowly, the way you wake from the kind of sleep that comes after extreme stress, heavy and slightly disoriented. The events of the previous day settling back into sequence in her mind like cards being sorted. She lay still for a moment and took inventory. Lily was okay. They were at Evelyn's. Ronald Brooks was in custody. Elizabeth Grant had sat beside her in a first aid station and meant it. She picked up her phone. Missed calls. Text messages. Voicemails. Emails from journalists she didn't know. One email from a law firm in Indianapolis she didn't know. And one text from a number saved only as Elizabeth G. sent that morning that said, "Checking in. How is Lily? How are you?" Rachel looked at that text for a long time. Then she typed back, "Lily's fever broke early this morning. She's eating biscuits. I slept. We're okay." The reply came in minutes. "That is the best thing I've heard today. I'll be in touch this afternoon. Take your time." The law firm's email was from a woman named Patricia Hale, a civil rights attorney based in Indianapolis with years of practice. She was not soliciting Rachel's business. She was not pitching a case. She had written a single paragraph that said she was aware of what had happened, that Rachel had the right to know what her legal options were, and that, if Rachel wanted to have a conversation at any point, entirely without obligation, she was available. She had included her direct number and signed her name. Rachel read it twice and forwarded it to Evelyn with the subject line, "What do you think?" Evelyn's reply came quickly. It said, "Call her." Rachel called her. Patricia Hale answered on the second ring with a voice that was direct and warm and immediately competent in the way that certain professionals are competent, where the competence is so embedded in the person that it comes through before they've even finished their opening sentence. "Ms. Bennett," Patricia said, "how is your daughter?" "Better. Fever broke early this morning. I'm glad. I want you to know before we say anything else that I watched the CEO's press conference and I have been following this situation closely. And I want to be straightforward with you. The airline's response has been, by corporate standards, genuinely good. Elizabeth Grant did the right things. That does not mean your interests and the airline's interests are perfectly aligned. And I want you to have someone in your corner whose only job is to make sure that what you are offered actually reflects what you and your daughter experienced." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "What do you think I experienced?" "I think you experienced something that should never have happened," Patricia said without hesitation. "And I think you handled it with more dignity than most people are capable of, under conditions that were designed, intentionally or not, to make you invisible. And I think your daughter is going to grow up and look back on what her mother did on that plane, and it is going to mean something profound to her." A pause. "And I think that Ronald Brooks needs to understand in every possible legal and financial term available to us what it cost to put your hands on a child." Rachel closed her eyes. She opened them. She looked at the wall of Evelyn's kitchen, the wall that had on it a cross-stitch Evelyn had made herself years ago, and a photograph of Rachel at her high school graduation, and a drawing Lily had done of a figure that was either a reindeer or a dog, and that Evelyn had framed because she said it was the best art she had ever seen. "Tell me what I need to know," Rachel said. At the other side of Indianapolis, Ronald Brooks was in a conference room at Frank Delaney's temporary office, which Frank had set up in a rented space downtown. because Ronald's legal situation required more than a phone call. Ronald had slept at a hotel near the airport. He had not slept well. He'd lain in a hotel bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the particular silence of a person whose life has been drastically rearranged and who has not yet decided what the rearrangement means. Frank set a document on the table. Formal assault charge has been filed. Arraignment is set for soon. Given the circumstances and the public nature of the incident, the DA's office is not going to be looking for this to go away quietly. Ronald looked at the document. What are they asking for? At minimum, probation and a fine. Realistically, given the age of the victim and the number of witnesses and the degree of public attention, they will push for something more. Possible jail time. Short, but real. Ronald said nothing. The civil side is the bigger concern, Frank continued. I expect the family to file. The airline's settlement offer to them, whatever it is, does not protect you from a separate civil action. You are not the airline. You are an individual who struck a child. I told you what happened. I told you it was Ronald. Frank's voice was not unkind, but it didn't move. I have read 6 witness statements. I've read the police report. I've watched a press conference in which a CEO of a major airline flew to Indianapolis personally to sit with the family. You are not in a position where the narrative is in question. The only question that is relevant to you right now is how you respond to that narrative going forward. And how you respond will determine the difference between a situation that is very bad and a situation that defines the rest of your life. Ronald looked at his hands. They were hands he had used for decades to dial phones and shake other men's hands, and sign contracts and carry a laptop bag onto an airplane. They were ordinary hands. He had not looked at them this way before. What does responding correctly look like? He said. Frank looked at him for a long moment. It starts with something you have not done yet, he said. It starts with saying out loud, without qualification, that what you did was wrong. The silence that followed lasted seconds. Frank counted. It was wrong, Ronald said. His voice was low. It was not the voice of a man performing remorse for strategic purposes, or, if it was, it had traveled far enough through him on its way out that it arrived sounding like something real. What I did was wrong. She was a child. She was sick. He stopped. I knew she was sick. Her mother told me, and He stopped again. I didn't care. Frank wrote nothing. He let the words stay where they were. I didn't care, Ronald said again, quieter. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. Not what I did, why I didn't care. Lily found James Whitaker's text at noon. She had been going through Rachel's phone, which Rachel allowed under the strict supervision of being in the same room, and she had found the message thread with James Whitaker, and read it with the concentration of a child, sounding out words she mostly knew. Mama, Lily said, this man says Franklin is a good name. Rachel looked up from her own phone. He does. How does he know about Franklin? He was on the plane. He was the one who helped us. Lily looked at the screen. Can I write back? Rachel hesitated for half a second. Then, go ahead. Lily typed with the one-finger focus of a 6-year-old navigating a touchscreen, her tongue between her teeth. She typed for a full minute. She handed the phone back to Rachel. Rachel read what Lily had written. She read it twice. Her throat closed. The message said, Hi, this is Lily. Thank you for helping me and my mama. My mama said you made a very important phone call. I think you are brave. Franklin says thank you too. He is right here. From Lily, age 6. Rachel looked at her daughter. That's perfect, she said. "Are you going to send it?" Rachel pressed send. Sent. Lily nodded with the satisfied finality of a person who has completed an important task. She slid off the chair and went to find Evelyn and ask if there were more biscuits. James Whitaker read Lily's message in his car outside a hardware store in Chicago. He'd gone there to buy light bulbs, the ordinary mission of an ordinary day, and he had been sitting in the parking lot for minutes because his legs had stopped cooperating after he read the message. He was 63 years old. He had served years in the United States Army. He had been in rooms where the stakes were incomparably higher than a flight to Indianapolis. He had made decisions under conditions that most people would not survive making decisions in. He did not consider himself a sentimental man. He sat in the parking lot of the hardware store and felt Lily's message in his chest like a physical thing. He typed back, "Dear Lily, you are very brave too. Much braver than me. Take good care of Franklin. He is lucky to have you. From Mr. Whitaker." He put the phone in his pocket. He sat another minute. Then he got out of the car, went inside, bought his light bulbs, and went home. He did not tell anyone about the message. Some things you hold privately, not because they are secret, but because they are complete in themselves and do not need an audience. The twist that nobody had anticipated came in the afternoon, and it came from a direction that had nothing to do with airlines or attorneys or press conferences. It came from Karen Ellis. Karen had spent the morning in her apartment. She had not gone online. She had not watched the news. She had sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her personnel file, which she had printed out years ago for some forgotten reason and kept in a folder in her filing cabinet. And she had read through years of her professional life. The commendations, the performance reviews, the thank you notes from passengers, a dozen of them over the years. People who had remembered her name long enough to write to the airline. She had read all of it with the careful attention of someone trying to understand who they had been in light of who they had just discovered they could be in a moment of crisis. She called Rachel's number. She had gotten it from Tyler, who had gotten it from the gate agent Mark, who had gotten it from the executive operations contact list. It had taken calls and time, and the whole chain of it felt to Karen like appropriate difficulty for what she was trying to do. Rachel answered. "Hello, Miss Bennett." Karen paused. "My name is Karen Ellis. I was the lead flight attendant on your flight yesterday." The silence on Rachel's end lasted seconds. They were very specific seconds. "I know who you are," Rachel said. Her voice was measured, not cold, but not warm. The voice of someone who was deciding in real time how to hold a conversation they didn't expect. "I want to say something to you," Karen said. "I am not calling because my attorney told me to. I don't have an attorney. I'm not calling because I want anything from you. I have no right to want anything from you." She stopped, took a breath. "I'm calling because I owe you the truth. And the truth is that I failed you and your daughter. Not because of a bad system or a flawed protocol or any of the other things I could point to. I failed you because in the moment that mattered, I made a choice to manage the situation rather than stand in it, and a 6-year-old girl paid the price for that choice. And I need you to know that I know that completely, without any qualification." Rachel said nothing. The silence was not empty. It was full of something that was working its way through her. "I don't expect your forgiveness," Karen continued. "I'm not asking for it. I'm not calling to feel better. I'm calling because you deserve to hear this directly from me and not from a press statement or a second-hand account. What happened on that plane was wrong, and my response to it was wrong, and I am sorry. Genuinely, completely sorry. Another silence. Longer. Then Rachel said, "How is it that the woman who ran the whole crew is the only one who called me?" Karen closed her eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what the others are doing today. I only know what I needed to do." "What you needed to do," Rachel repeated softly, not sarcastically, thoughtfully. "Do you know what my daughter asked me yesterday on the plane? She asked me why. She asked why that man did what he did. What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know because I don't." Rachel paused. "But what scares me more than what he did is what happened after. Because he was always going to be who he was. Some people are just who they are. What I couldn't understand was how people who are trained to protect passengers watched it happen and decided a form was the right answer." She stopped. "Now I understand a little better. Not because you called, because of what you said. You were afraid, and fear made you look professional instead of human." Karen's throat was tight. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it was." "I appreciate you calling," Rachel said, and she meant it. Rachel Bennett was her mother's daughter, and her mother had raised her to mean what she said. "I can't tell you it doesn't still hurt, but I appreciate that you called." They said goodbye. Karen sat with her phone in her lap for a long time after. She did not feel better, exactly, but she felt something shift. Something that had been locked in her chest since the moment she had walked away from Rachel in that aisle. And the shifting felt like the first necessary movement of something that would take a long time to fully resolve. The hearing for Tyler's commendation was formally scheduled days after the incident, but Elizabeth Grant did not wait for the formal ceremony. She called Tyler directly that afternoon while he was at home in Chicago, eating a late lunch and watching his phone with the slightly exhausted expression of someone whose life has suddenly acquired a great deal of noise. "Mr. Brooks," she said when he answered, "I want to be clear about something. The commendation is real, and it matters, and you will receive it in a ceremony with your colleagues and your family, if you want them there. But I wanted to tell you separately, personally, that what you did on that plane was not about training or protocol. It was about character. And character is the one thing that no airline can install in a person. You either have it or you don't. You have it." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking I should have done more," he said. "I keep thinking if I had pushed harder from the beginning, if I had gone to the captain myself." "You were new into your career," Elizabeth said. "You were operating in a hierarchy where the lead attendant had years, and you still did not look away. You still moved toward them when everyone else was moving away. That is not a small thing, Tyler. That is everything." He exhaled slowly. "Ms. Grant, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Yesterday morning when you got that call, what made you get on a plane? You could have handled it from the ground. The press conference, the terminations, all of it. You didn't have to physically go." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, she spoke carefully, the way people speak when they are getting something right that they have gotten wrong before. "When I was younger," she said, "I was on a flight, not as an employee, as a passenger, and something happened. Not as serious as what happened yesterday, but something. And I looked away. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself someone else would handle it." She paused. No one did. "And I spent a long time after that understanding what I had actually done when I made that choice." Another pause. "Yesterday I got to make a different choice. That's all it was. A different choice." Ronald Brooks' arraignment soon lasted minutes. He entered a not guilty plea, which was procedural rather than philosophical. Frank had explained the distinction clearly. The judge set bail. Ronald paid it. He walked out of the courthouse with Frank on one side and a coat turned up on the other side, and cameras on every side, and said nothing. But the moment that would last, the moment that the internet clipped and shared and sat with, did not happen in the courtroom. It happened on the sidewalk outside when a woman called out from across the street. Not a reporter, not a protester, just a woman who happened to be walking past, who recognized the face from the news, who stopped. She was 6 years old, the woman said. She said it simply, without heat, without performance. Just the fact of it stated plainly into the air between them. Ronald Brooks stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse with his lawyer beside him and the cameras around him, and he looked across the street at this woman he had never met. And he did something that Frank had not prepared him for, and that the cameras had not expected, and that nobody in the crowd had anticipated. He nodded. Not a denial, not an explanation, not the posture of a man defending himself, just a nod, small and real, the acknowledgement of a truth that had no defense. The woman looked at him for another moment, then she walked on. Weeks later, Rachel Bennett sat in Patricia Hale's office in Indianapolis and signed the settlement agreement. The terms were not disclosed publicly, at Patricia's insistence, which the airline had accepted. What Rachel would say publicly in the brief statement Patricia helped her draft was that she was satisfied with the airline's response and grateful for the actions taken on behalf of her daughter, and that she hoped what had happened would mean that the next mother who asked for help on a plane would not have to wait for a loudspeaker to be heard. The statement ran in outlets. Lily, who did not know about the settlement and would not understand it for many years, spent that afternoon in Evelyn's backyard with Franklin on a lawn chair beside her. Drawing a picture, she said, was for the loudspeaker lady. Evelyn had looked at the drawing, which depicted what appeared to be 3 figures holding hands near what might have been an airplane or possibly a large bird, and asked Lily who the 3 figures were. "That's me," Lily said, pointing to the smallest one. "And that's Mama. And that's the loudspeaker lady. What are they doing?" Lily looked at the drawing with the evaluating eye of an artist. "Standing together," she said, "because that's what you do." Evelyn looked at her granddaughter. She thought about all the things you spend a lifetime trying to teach a child, all the values and lessons and hard-won understanding that you work so carefully to pass on, and how sometimes a 6-year-old with a crayon and a turtle backpack arrives at the center of the whole thing before you can even open your mouth. "That is exactly what you do," Evelyn said. Months after the incident, Tyler received the Horizon Airlines Excellence in Service Award at a ceremony in Chicago. His mother flew in from Lagos. His sister came from another city. Elizabeth Grant placed the award in his hands personally and said in front of the assembled room that the award that year was not a formality. It was a statement about what this airline intended to be going forward, and the person holding it was the reason they knew it was possible. Tyler looked at the award. He thought about row 14 and a sick child, and a mother's voice cracking on the word, "please." He thought about the specific weight of a moment when you can turn towards something or away from it. He thought about the fact that in his time flying that day was the moment he had learned the most important thing his job would ever teach him. It was not about altitude. It was not about protocol. It was not about the PA system or the crew hierarchy or the airline's policies or the press conference or any of the structures that surround the moment when it actually arrives. It was about a child who needed someone to act like a human being. And it was about whether you would. Ronald Brooks would eventually plead guilty to a reduced charge, pay a fine, and complete a court-ordered program. He would not return to his industry. He would, by all accounts, become quieter. Whether that quietness was regret or strategy or something in between, only Ronald Brooks knew. And Ronald Brooks was not talking. Karen Ellis took a position with a nonprofit in Indianapolis that worked with children in underserved communities. She did not go back to aviation. She would say later, in the one interview she ever gave, that she had spent years being very good at not letting things touch her. And one day discovering that this had been, the whole time, the wrong goal entirely. Nancy Reed went home to her daughter a while after the incident and stayed for months. She started writing something. She didn't know yet whether it was a memoir or an essay or something with no name. She just knew she had things to say about looking away and what it costs. And she had decades of teaching people to find the right words for things. And she was not gonna waste that. James Whitaker replaced his light bulbs and went about his life and did not talk about what he had done unless someone asked him directly. When they did, he told them the same thing every time. He said he had made a phone call. He said it was the easiest thing he had ever done. He said the hardest part had been nothing more than deciding to do it. And Rachel Bennett drove back to Chicago weeks after the incident with Lily asleep in her car seat, and Franklin, the turtle backpack, wedged between Lily and the door, and she thought about all the things that had happened and all the things that had almost happened differently. And she thought about what Nancy Reed had said on television, that the only difference between looking away and not looking away is a decision. And she thought about what it means to be a mother in a world where your child can be hurt before you can stop it. And how the answer to that is not to pretend otherwise, and is not to become afraid, but is to make sure that when the moment comes where a decision is required, you are the kind of person who has already made it. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily's sleeping face, the small, soft weight of her, the particular perfection of a child asleep, unaware of the size of the love aimed at them from the front seat. Rachel Bennett looked at her daughter and she drove home. And Franklin the turtle backpack rode beside Lily all the way back to Chicago, having seen more of the world in one day than most turtle backpacks ever do, holding steady as he always had, right where he was needed. Some stories end. This one became the kind that stays, the kind that people carry with them into the next moment where a decision is required, and the moment after that, and the moment after that. Because that is what true stories do. They do not finish. They travel forward in the people who heard them, arriving again and again exactly when they are most needed. Asking the only question that has ever mattered: what will you do when it is time to decide? Here is a beautifully written, emotional 280-word paragraph based on the story. In the end, this story isn't really about an airplane, a kick, or even a CEO who stepped in. It's about the quiet, terrifying power of a single decision. The choice to look away, or the choice to stand up. When a sick little girl cried out for help and grown adults in uniform turned their backs, something broke inside all of us who heard it. But then, one man made a phone call. One young flight attendant chose kindness when no one else would. And one powerful woman chose to be human instead of hiding behind policy. In those few moments above the clouds, ordinary people reminded us what courage actually looks like. Not loud heroism, but the simple, stubborn refusal to stay silent when a child is hurting. The lesson is heartbreakingly clear. In life, the moments that define us are rarely dramatic. They arrive quietly in crowded planes, busy streets, or family dinners, asking only one question: will you look away, or will you choose to see? Will you protect what is right even when it costs you something? Because every time we choose silence, a child learns the world is unsafe. Every time we choose courage, a child learns she matters. Never underestimate the power of one brave decision. It can travel faster than any jet and heal deeper than any medicine. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, drop your city in the comments and tell me, what's one moment in your life when you chose not to look away? I read every single comment. And if you believe in stories that actually matter, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe with the bell on. Let's keep spreading messages that make us better humans. Thank you for being here.